Hey guys, welcome back to Genealogy and Chronology. Today we are back to Middle Earth and we will be discussing about the Elven genealogy of JRR Tolkien's works. In case you don't know, I post a new video every 2 weeks regarding genealogies and chronologies. I have already made posters of Royal House of Numenor, Royal House of Arnor, Royal House of Gondor, and the list of chieftains of Dunedain. You can find these videos on my channel. Let's move on to today's topic. Elves were immortal beings created by Eru himself, and a total of 144 elves were awakened by Eru in 1050 of Years of the Trees in Middle-earth. These elves were awakened with their full body statures and were known as the unbegotten. The first 6 elves to be awakened were Imin, Tata, Enel, and their wives, and they became the leaders of the remaining 138 elves. Most of the Vanyar descended from the group of Imin. The Noldor descended from the group of Tata, and the Teleri descended from the group of Enel. Ingve was High King of all elves and King of Vanyar, and he descended directly from Imin. After visiting Valinor, Ingve never returned to Middle-earth. Finwë was High King of Noldor, and he descended from the group of Tata. Elwë was the High King of Teleri, and he descended from the group of Enel. These 3 elves became leaders of the 3 groups, and they would visit Valinor on the behest of Orome in 1102 of Years of the Trees. After returning from Valinor, Ingve and Finwë would lead their people to Aman and reach Valinor in 1133 of Years of the Trees. Elwë, who was leading Teleri, would get lost off his way and end up in the forest of Doriath, where he would meet Melian, who was a Maya, and they would marry soon after that. Some Teleri would stay behind in Middle-earth, searching for Elwë, while some others under the leadership of Elwë's brother Olwë would go to Aman in 1151 of Years of the Trees, and these elves would become Falmari. Elwë would be found by his people, and he would establish Doriath and become King of Doriath and High King of Sindar in Middle-earth. In 1400 of Years of the Trees, Melkor is released from the halls of Mandos, and he sees elves and envies the creation of Eru. We will discuss one house at a time, starting with the house of Finwë. The High King of Noldor was Finwë. His eldest son was Fëanor. Fëanor started crafting the Silmarils in 1449 of the Years of the Trees from the light of the 2 trees of Valinor. Melkor desired for these Silmarils and demanded them from Fëanor. Upon refusal of Fëanor, Melkor steals the Silmarils and kills Finwë, and also destroys the 2 trees along with Ungoliant and flees to Middle-earth. Fëanor and his sons would swear an oath that none shall hold the Silmarils except Fëanor or his kin, and thus began the flight of Noldor from Aman to Middle-earth. Fëanor led the first host of elves to the Middle-earth. His half-brother Fingolfin led the second host, and his other half-brother, Finarfin, led the third host of Noldor to Middle-earth. Fëanor and his people would reach to Aqualond and seek for the ships from Falmari to sail to Middle-earth. The king of Falmari was Olwë, brother of Elwë. When refused, Fëanor and his people started manning the ships of Falmari, and when the Falmari resisted, a bitter battle started between the 2 groups. Both sides refused to concede an inch, but when the second host of Noldor, led by Fingolfin, arrived and saw the ensuing battle, they assumed that their brothers were being attacked by Falmari and joined the battle, and the Falmari were overcome. This event is known as the First Kinslaying. Later, Fingolfin regretted his actions when he learned the truth about Fëanor. Thus the doom of Mandos would be pronounced, and hearing this, Finarfin, who was leading the third host of elves to Middle-earth, would turn back and return to Valinor, though his children would follow Fëanor to Middle-earth. Thus Finarfin became High King of remaining Noldor in Aman. Upon reaching the shores of Middle-earth at Losgor, Fëanor commanded the ships to be burned. Thus the host of Fingolfin would be betrayed. Fingolfin and his followers, not wanting to return to Valinor in disgrace, would be forced to take the path of Helcarax in the north. Many of the Fingolfin's followers would perish in this crossing. Fëanor would soon meet his death in the hands of Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. His eldest son Maedhros abdicated the high kingship of Noldor in favor of his uncle Fingolfin, who ruled for over 400 years. We will keep discussing about the sons of Fëanor as they keep killing their kin and frequently appear in this tale. Fingolfin set a siege of Angband which lasted for over 400 years. Morgoth waited and increased his strength and his orcs in this siege, and in the year 455 of First Age, he broke the siege with great number of orcs, balrogs and dragons, commencing the Battle of the Sudden Flame. Many elves would perish in this battle and many elven strongholds would also be lost. Fingolfin, High King of Noldor in Middle-earth, would ride to Angband and challenge Morgoth for a duel. In the ensuing battle between the Elven King and the Dark Lord, Fingolfin would lose his life. Fingolfin was succeeded by his son Fingon as the second High King of Noldor in Middle-earth. Fingon too would perish in 472 of First Age in the aftermath of the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears, fighting Gothmog, the very Balrog which killed his uncle Fëanor. Fingolfin would be succeeded by his brother Turgon, who was also King of Gondolin since year 64 of the First Age. Turgon was successful in maintaining the secrecy of his kingdom from Morgoth for over 4 centuries, but the treachery of Turgon's nephew, Maeglin, in revealing the location of Gondolin to the forces of Morgoth would result in the sack of Gondolin in the year 510 of the First Age. Turgon would be slain in defending Gondolin. Thus the High Kingship would be passed to Gil-galad because by this time Argon, brother of Turgon, and all sons of Finarfin were already dead. We will now discuss about the sons of Finarfin. The eldest son of Finarfin was Finrod. He came to Middle-earth along with his uncle Fingolfin. Like Turgon, he would establish his secret realm of Nargothrond with the help of dwarves. Thus he became the king of Nargothrond in the year 52 of the First Age. He was the first elf to come across men and he became very close with them. In the Battle of the Sudden Flame, he was saved by Barahir, and thus Finrod gave his ring to Barahir as a reminder of their friendship. This ring would pass from generation to generation as a heirloom by the descendants of Barahir and later by the Dunedain until King Elessar. Finrod would later join Beren, son of Barahir, in his quest for Silmaril and meet his end trying to save Beren's life. Before his death, Finrod named Orodreth as his successor, who was his nephew, since both his brothers Angrod and Egnor were killed in the Battle of the Sudden Flame. Orodreth had a very short rule of only 30 years, and he died in the sack of Nargothrond, dying in the Battle of Thumlad. Nargothrond would be destroyed in this battle. Thus, Gil-galad became High King of all Noldor in Middle-earth after the sack of Nargothrond and the fall of Gondolin. And now let's discuss about the House of Elve. Elu-Thingol, also known as Elve, was the High King of Teleri in Middle-earth, and he ruled over Doriath as a king. Thingol married Milian, who was a Maya, and they had a daughter named Luthien. Beren, who was an Edain, would fall in love with Luthien, but Thingol disapproved of this. He demanded a Silmaril from the Morgoth's crown as a bride price. Beren and Luthien, with the aid of Finrod, would complete the task, though Finrod would lose his life and Beren his hand in the quest for Silmaril. Beren would lose his life in the hunt for the wolf who ate his hand and the Silmaril. In grief, Luthien would also pass away. Beren and Luthien would be reincarnated to live a mortal life, and they both lived as Lord and Lady of Tol Galen. They had a son named Dior Eleuchil. Thingol would also lose his life because of the Silmaril which he had received from Beren. He had asked the dwarves to set the Silmaril in the dwarven necklace of Noklamir. The dwarves demanded the necklace as they had crafted it, but Thingol refused and would die in the battle with dwarves. Beren would retrieve the necklace which still had the Silmaril attached to it from dwarves in the battle of San Athrod and give it to Luthien. And Beren and Luthien would pass away in 503 of the First Stage, and the necklace would be inherited by Dio, son of Beren. Hearing of the death of Beren and Luthien, the sons of Fëanor, still bound by the oath they swore to retrieve the Silmaril, would sack Doriath. This is known as the second kinslaying. Dior and his wife Nimloth would perish in this kinslaying, but those loyal to kin would take the Silmaril and Dior's daughter Elving to the heavens of Sirion. Elving would grow and later marry Eärendil, who was son of Edain Tuor and elf Edril. Idril was the daughter of Turgon, king of Gondolin. She had survived the sack of Gondolin. This was the only marriage between two half-elves ever in the history of Middle-earth. Eärendil and Elving were blessed with twin sons, Elros and Elrond. Learning that Elving had survived the sack of Doriath and she also had the Silmarils, sons of Fëanor would attack Heavens of Sirion. This event would be known as the Third Kinslaying. They would march to Heavens of Sirion with their armies and slay almost every last elf save for Elros and Elrond. Elving would again escape with the Silmaril with the help of Ulmo and would meet Eärendil, who was out at sea on his boat. Elros and Elrond would be fostered by Medros, the very person who killed almost all their kin and sacked their city. Out of 7 sons of Fëanor, only Medros and Maglor survived all 3 kinslayings, and no one followed them under their leadership after these kinslayings. The perils and destruction brought by the sons of Fëanor benefited none except Morgoth, who now held uncontested power in Middle-earth. Eärendil would sail to Valinor and plead for the help of Valar to save Middle-earth and aid in the battle against Morgoth. Manwë was moved by the plea of Eärendil, and the Valar led their armies to Middle-earth, and thus began the War of Wrath, which lasted for 40 years. Such great was its destruction that almost whole of Beleriand was sunk beneath the waves. Morgoth would finally be overthrown, and the remaining 2 Silmarils would be recovered from his crown. But the Oath of Fëanor still burned in the hearts of Medros and Maglor, and they would steal the Silmarils from the camp of victorious host. Because of their deeds and evils, the Silmarils burned the hands of the 2 brothers, and Medros would cast himself in the fiery chasm, and Maglor would throw the other Silmaril in the sea. Thus, 1 Silmaril was now in earth, 1 in the sea, and the last one with Elving in the air. And yeah, the brothers managed to kill a few guards while stealing the Silmarils before finally bringing an end to themselves. Good work, sons of Fëanor. Most elves would depart to Valinor on the behest of Valar, but few would stay behind under the high kingship of Gil-galad. Grey Heavens and Lindon would be established soon afterwards. The Edain who fought in the War of Wrath along with Valar and Elves would be given the island realm of Numenor as a reward. I made a video of Royal House of Numenor a few days back. Be sure to watch it after this video. After 5 centuries of relative peace, Sauron would return to Middle-earth in year 500 of Second Age. Elven smiths would go on to establish a region in 750 of Second Age, and Sauron would commence his construction of Barad-dûr in 1000 of Second Age. In his fair form, Sauron would visit Eregion and guide the Elven smiths on making the Rings of Power. Celebrimbor, who was Lord of Eregion, would start to forge his 3 Elven Rings of Power, while Sauron would in secret forge the 1 ring in the cracks of Mount Doom. Celebrimbor would soon realize the real intentions of Sauron and send his 3 Elven Rings to Círdan, Gil-galad and Galadriel. But Sauron in his haste would march to Eregion and recover the greater rings. Despite much torture, Celebrimbor would not reveal the location of the 3 Elven Rings, and thus Sauron would kill Celebrimbor and use his body as a banner. Eregion would be sacked in 1697 of Second Age by the forces of Sauron. Elrond would establish Rivendell the same year, and Sauron would press on and lay a siege to Lindon and also Rivendell. Tar Minister, who was ruling Numenor at this time, sent a relief force to the aid of High King Gil-galad, and Sauron was forced to retreat to Mordor. Sauron would wait and grow his power for the next 500 years. His envy against Numenor grows ever more. In 33rd century of Second Age, Sauron declares himself as the king of all men. At this time, Numenor was being ruled by Ar-Pharazôn. Ar-Pharazôn, upon hearing that Sauron declared himself as the king of all men, sailed to Middle-earth and captured Sauron with no resistance. In just 3 years, Sauron would become king's advisor and convince the king to go to war against Valar. In his folly, Ar-Pharazôn would sail to Valinor and thus cause downfall of Numenor. Sauron survives the fall of Numenor and returns to Middle-earth to regroup his strength. Elendil, who was a descendant of Elros, would establish Arnor and Gondor along with his sons. Sauron would start his assaults on Gondor, and thus began the War of the Last Alliance. Gil-galad would march to Mordor along with Elrond and Elendil to battle Sauron. Both High Kings of Elves and men would meet their death. Sauron too would be defeated after the One Ring is cut from his finger by Isildur, son of Elendil. Thus ended the Second Age, and with the Noldorian rule over Middle-earth. The only Elven strongholds in Third Age would be Rivendell, whose lord was Elrond, Lothlorien, whose lord and lady were Celeborn and Galadriel, and the Woodland Realm under the kingship of Thranduil, son of Orofer, who was a prince of Doriath in his early days. After the One Ring is found and the shadow glows in Dol Guldur, the White Council is formed with Saruman, Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel as its members. The ring would pass from Gollum to Bilbo to Frodo. With the rising power of Sauron once again, Frodo is tasked with taking the ring to Mount Doom and destroying it. Thus, the Fellowship of the Ring is formed, and the details of which we all know. After the War of the Ring and the ultimate defeat of Sauron, Third Age concludes, and all elves, save for very few, depart to Undying Lands. Galadriel, Gandalf, Elrond, Bilbo and Frodo would also depart to Middle-earth. Arwen, daughter of Elrond, would marry Aragorn, who descended from the chieftains of Dunedain, who themselves descended from the royal house of Arnor and Gondor, which in turn descended from Númenórean nobility, and thus reuniting the blood of Eärendil and Elving. After the death of Aragorn in 120 of Fourth Age, Legolas, who may have been the last elf to leave Middle-earth, would sail to Valinor along with his friend Gimli. Arwen too would die in the year 121 of Fourth Age in grief of her husband's death, just like her grandmother's grandmother Luthien. Thus, the age of elves in Middle-earth ended, and their legacy is carried on in the blood of the Dunedain. I hope you all like this video of the Elven genealogy of Tolkien's work. Consider sharing this video and subscribing to my channel. If you want to see more Middle-earth related content like this, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.